Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sunita Balakrishnan, and I belong to Trivandrum, so I don't think I need to introduce myself. I'm only the moderator here. But we do have two people who have been doing much around their own areas, and I think it's best that they introduce themselves to give a full picture. So over to you, Ashutosh first. No, I'll put it. Okay, ladies first then. And
Okay. Can you hear me at the back? Okay, cool. I'm Shinjini Kumar, and I started my career a very long time ago at the Reserve Bank of India. The highlight of which was I used to give approvals to companies to bring capital in India. I used to handle FDI in India. So I did some important jobs, but then I went to US to study. I quit. I joined the private sector. I worked my way through Bank of America, PricewaterhouseCoopers. I've done various things. But the things that people find interesting in my career is, for a brief while, I was the CEO of Paytm's bank when they just got the license. I was also on their board later. And I used to head Citi's consumer bank for India. Both those jobs brought me closer to the consumer. And I ended up leaving Citi in 2020 to build my own startup. And that journey eventually led me to start to understand more about the nuances of finance and gender, which isn't a subject that I'd paid so much attention to running, big businesses, etc. And that eventually led me to travel through 30 cities of India and write this book, which is called Busy Women. And we will talk a little bit about that as well. So that's my introduction. First time author of two books. One is this, and the other is a collection of poems in Hindi. So it just so happened that I've changed my life once again completely. And thank you so much for having me here. Look forward to the conversation.
Ashutosh.
Good afternoon. I'm not as blessed as she is. My experience with the corporates is very, very limited. By profession, I'm a journalist. I started my career with Hindustan Times long back. And then I moved to the television channels. I was there with Aaj Tak for good 11 years, from 1995 to 2006. Then 2006, I got an offer to head a channel that is called IBN 7 with Network 18, and I was there as a managing editor for 8 years. Then something happened to me. I jumped into the darkness, left my profession, went to the politics, joined Aam Aadmi Party, and I thought that the world will change like all the revolutionaries and radicals. And then after a few years, I realized, no, the world is not changing, rather the world is changing me. So I changed party and came back again to the journalism. Now I run my own Satya Hindi, which is a digital platform. I use news and views both. I have written 5 books. Recently my book has come about 2024 parliamentary elections, which is called Reclaiming Bharat. And then another book about Modi's 2014 to 2019, which is called Hindu Rashtra. So basically, both the books are trying to understand this Hindutva and their governance and their ideology from the ideological framework. It's not chronicling of events, but... And then I had written 2 more books, one on Anna Hazare, another is a collection of my article with Thick Book. So yes, but my experience with boardrooms is absolutely zero.
Since Ashutosh confesses that his experience with boardrooms is zilch, I think we'll go back to Shinjini, who has considerable experience with boardrooms, and we'll come back to gender and how it manipulates or masterminds the working space or board space. So basically what I want to say is Shinjini's experience in writing her book, which is Busy Women, Building Commerce and Culture in Middle India. By the term Middle India, she's looking at the tier 2, tier 3 cities, not the cosmopolitan cities, and about women in their various, I'll leave her to explain that. She has interviewed over 300 women across cities and has compiled her experiences and outlook that she gathered from that into this book. So Shinjini, tell us about how this book came about and how this connects our topic, which is basically, it's a heavy topic, how gender masterminds today's corporate space. I think we'll tweak it a little bit to talk about experiences. Shinjini.
Sure. So I'll start out by telling Ashutosh that, Ashutosh, you've gone beyond the boardroom, because boardroom is about power and setting direction for the future for corporate. But you've done that in politics. Whether your experience was fruitful or not is not the point. The point is that you know the battle, you know the struggle, you understand the idea. And the reason boardrooms are important is because eventually, for those two reasons that I said, it is about who exercises the power of making decisions. And that applies to every level. If you are a small household, it applies to who makes the decision about whether the limited saving you have will go to sending your child abroad to study, or whether they will go into your wife setting up a entrepreneurial venture, or you going on a family vacation abroad. So that, who makes that decision? Similarly, in corporations, who makes the big decisions to where the money will be invested, and who will get those returns, and who are those beneficiaries, whether we pay a higher dividend to the employees this year because inflation has been high or COVID has hit, or whether we take that money and give it to our shareholders because they'll always be greedy. Now I don't work for corporates anymore, I can say this. And so those are the type of decisions that you make. Similarly, you make resource allocation decisions in politics, you make resource allocation decisions in small businesses. So we will sort of expand the topic according to that. So I think it is something that you said yesterday when we were talking about this subject, that it is about the power. So we will talk about that a little bit more. And I think authors should speak less and read a little bit from their books. So as you navigate the topic, I'll read a couple of little snippets from the book, so you get a sense of what I heard from people. So when I set out to travel, I have never worked in gender in my life. I'm not a scholar of gender and women's studies. I'm a reader of it, but not a scholar of it. And so for me, this whole curiosity came from real experience of trying to build a company for young girls and young women who are often the first time users of finance in their lives. They haven't seen their mothers exercising agency over money, and they are doing it for the first time. And so we were building for this population, and that curiosity took me to many different places, and issues are always complex, so it led me into this travel. And some of the women that I met, also to Sunita, they also talked about how the journey to the boardroom was harder for them than it was for their brothers or their husbands, because typically if you are in a business family, for the man, he has to just say no. He doesn't even have to say yes, it will come to him. But for the woman, it's usually, even in liberal, progressive families with all resources and love for their daughters, it is still not as easy. But in the book, I talk about women who have done it, and therefore I want to sort of show that there is a path, and there will be more of these instances in future. So to that extent, I think we are talking about a very relevant subject here.
When Shinjini talked about board, I was thinking the board, if you could use a euphemism, it is power. And I think it's at that point that I want to ask Ashutosh, can you take this topic ahead? I mean, if you are taking board for power, the word board to mean as a euphemism for power, could you take it forward with your experience in the newsrooms?
See, I started my career when journalism was led by great editors. And there was a very strong dividing line between the corporates and the editorials. Very, very strong line. And in fact, to the extent of enmity. That editors used to ensure that none of the corporate guys should enter into the newsroom and should decide. Yeah, should decide. And in fact, I remember one of the incidents, one of my editors in Aaj Tak, Mr. S.P. Singh was there, and the legendary editor. And he used to come to the office by 9:30 in the morning. And one of his second in command used to come a little early. So when he came in, he saw the CEO of the company was talking to the second in command. So once that CEO has left, he said what he was talking about. He said he was asking about editorial. And Mr. S.P. Singh told him immediately right there that if I see you again talking to this gentleman, you are out. So my training has come from there. But I'm also fortunate and blessed in the sense because I started my career when the Indian economy was opening. And when I became the managing editor, I did realize that the product is the same. and I am pushing from the editorial side and somebody is pushing from the corporate side. So unless there is a good partnership between the two, it will be difficult. If I am pulling in the different direction, he is pulling in the different direction, that she is pulling in a different direction, it will be difficult. So instead of being a tug of war between the two verticals, we sat down and we decided we have to help each other. Fortunately or unfortunately, I had never interacted with the board members, but what I saw in my newsroom and the women were working in the corporate side, in the sales, the marketing teams, that over a period of time, I saw young women asserting themselves. Not talking very roughly, but talking very assertively, asserting themselves. And that was something new for me. Because I come from a very traditional background, come from UP, where women are not as empowered as we see into the Bombay, Delhi or other places. And it was very, very important for me because few of these women, they were very assertive, very aggressive, and they had a hunger and desire to compete, not with the boys, but to be the number one in the industry. I think that has been, over a period of time, has improved a lot of. And today's world, if you see the most of the TV anchors, especially the women anchors, they are so aggressive. And sometimes they cross the boundary in the sense, the editorial sense. But that aggression is fascinating. And that's what is needed. Because men are very conservative by nature. They don't want to cede their space of power. Because they have captured that space for thousands of years. Only in the last 30, 40 years, they are feeling the heat. So it's difficult for them to cede that space, even in the boardroom, to, if I could say so.
I believe the Company Act, when it was, Shinjini, we were talking about that. The amendment of the Company Act in the 2010s, I think it mandated inclusion of women in the boardroom, the board. And did that actually turn out into a PR tool or something like tokenism? I mean, did it end up in tokenism? What do you think? What did you come across in your investigations?
So, whenever you will start to, frame public policy around diversity and inclusion, some degree of tokenism is to be expected because, to start with, I think when companies were first starting to look for women directors, they were looking within their families because it was so much easier to get, get a daughter or a daughter-in-law or a wife to be on the board and to, say yes to whatever they're told. Many times they will just sign the papers without even, reading what is written there. And I'm not saying that has changed completely. It has not changed completely. It's still there. In fact, you might have read news stories about women who end up going to jail because they took director's liability without even understanding what liabilities they were, and these are women from families, and there have been famous fraud cases where this has happened. So yes, some degree of tokenism, and then that tokenism can sometimes, lead to a demonstration effect, which can also be positive, because then if you're a leader, if you're a leading company, and you say, I have transgender person, for example, in my board, then other people feel that, maybe having a transgender person in my board is not such a bad idea. So I think the tokenism helps. What is disappointing though, is the fact that the sheer availability of qualified women is much higher than the actual placement of them on the boards. That fact is the one that we need to kind of stay focused on, that there are now so many more women. India, in fact, is a country that has higher rate of women going for STEM education than many of our Western developed counterparts like US or Australia or UK. But the actual participation of these people in the workforce tends to drop off very quickly. So, women hit a level after which they just stop working. So in my book, I talk about a phenomenon called Kya Zarurat Hai. If you understand Hindi, you will understand what it means is, why do you need to do this? You are a woman, you just got married into a well-to-do family, your husband's already earning money, you have a small child, you need to take care of him, you have a beautiful house, you can do gardening. Kya zarurat hai? Why do you want to take a transfer, go to another city? Why do you want to? So there is this constant answering that you have to give to justify every step of your professional progress, and therefore many just tend to drop off. And because we have so much drop off, by the time it comes to getting to the level of the boards, there is actually, the pool becomes quite small. And that has been an excuse for many years for not having enough women on the boards. But now there have been conscious interventions, and I have been a part of a few such interventions, where women are being groomed to become independent directors. And if you actually see the population of men directors, it's not that they're all coming with high qualifications. Thank you very much, because if they did, we would have a much higher level of governance in this country than we have. So it's not like to like. But when it comes to women, there is always that higher expectation. Oh, but she doesn't have a CA degree. Oh, but she hasn't been a CFO. Oh, but she hasn't been a CEO. Of course, you're talking to a pool of people who have started, like Ashutosh said, last 40, 30 years. So they obviously there is a smaller pool. So you're not even looking. So I just think that this idea has, the fact that this idea has found legal, regulatory push is a great step. The fact that many corporates are doing it even as a form of tokenism, or even as something that they can show off, that's also a good thing. But the reality is that more diverse boards lead to better business outcomes and higher profitability. And these are proven statistics. But we are still not getting to that point, even though women are there and available, because that line of sight is very, very clear. Men look around them and all they see is equally qualified men, all went to the same school, college, university. My father, your father, I did CA under your father did CA under my grandfather. That network is so strong that it's very hard for them to, sort of really take a look and find that woman there. So that's one of the things I was trying to do in my book, by saying that you think that, when women do business, they're only making clothes and they're setting up boutiques and they're, doing cloud kitchens. But you find women in my book who are making concrete, who are getting up at 3 a.m. and taking bitumen out of their workshops to lay concrete on the roads. So you have to look for them. You will not find them, if you're looking at your eye level, because there are not that many of them. There aren't 10,000 women making bitumen. But if there is somebody doing it, and you are looking for one, then please go find that person. And we make that, a lot of that effort, Sunita, that we started to make in corporates when we were doing hiring, because we would give out these mandates to, and even now, people do give mandates to recruitment firms and say, I definitely want at least 30% of women on this slate. So if I'm hiring one independent director and you are bringing me a slate of 9 independent director candidates, then 3 of them must be women. So that kind of very executable guidance is what will begin to make some change. But we have a very long way to go. So for sure, we are nowhere close to fulfilling either the legal mandate or the mandate in spirit.
I think we should also add to this something we talked about earlier, about your being invited on board of more of non-profits than profits. Okay, and how you did not, quite like the idea of being only on the board of non-profits. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
I have other questions for him.
Okay, but it's one of my biggest discoveries in life, because I started working at 22 as a central banker. And when you start with the government, there is a automatic degree of gender parity. So I was 23 years old and I was in RBI Delhi, and I had to get up at 5 a.m. to go to the RBI office so that 500 boxes of currency notes could get packed and sent to, Punjab. And I was the only girl in that huge building, and I never felt unsafe, because, there was this whole machinery of the institution that backs you when you're doing that. And then, of course, I did everything with that same level of confidence, because I got it early in my life. It was a gift. And then I quit, okay? And then I am now in the pool of, available people to be independent directors. And guess what? More people call me to be an independent director on the board of their sister-in-laws or their, cousins, not-for-profit, and nothing against them. I'm very respectful of their work. But I have no qualifications to be on the board of a not-for-profit in reality. And of course, over the period of time, I have acquired some degree of competence because I've done some of that work. But the fact that I have, 30 years of experience of building institutions and, hiring people doing various things, I don't get invited to that many for-profit boards because for-profit boards require a very high degree of, trust from the people who are recruiting, and they are looking for people who are similar to them. And when you're looking for people who are similar to you, they're mostly men. So it is also true that when you are a woman, you do get branded for your goodness. So lots of people ask. Somebody the other day just asked me, so what are you good? I said, I think my best quality is I'm able to fire people easily. And they were like, what? You can fire? You don't look like that kind of a person. I was like, what is a person who fires well supposed to look like? Am I supposed to have horns on my head? I can fire people because I understand they are not fit for the job and I need to, find somebody who's better for the job so I can fire people. But it's just really, really amazing how that stereotyping of women as, if you're a good person, then you're an auntie, then you can't be a tough boss. If you're a tough boss, then you can't be a, nice person. So it's all a lot of those cobwebs are in our heads. Even and we carry all these attitudes from our home to our companies, to our workplaces, right? Because we see things at home. And in my journey, I found it astonishing how many women I met who were part of their family businesses and were doing incredible role within their family businesses. But in their own families, you could see that the dynamics between their children and them was more of an auntie or mom than of a professional relationship. So it is true that we don't value, that there is that degree of, and I don't know, maybe you want to counter it, maybe somebody wants to counter it, but that's been my experience.
Would you like to counter it?
No, I just want to say one thing that men are heading for trouble. And why I'm saying so? Because the pendulum which has shifted towards men for thousands of years is trying to come towards the center. And this is something which is really creating a lot of problems because I could see in the newsroom and working at the higher editorial positions that men in their heart are feeling intimidated. Men in their heart are feeling little bit uncertain. They are getting restless because earlier they were happy competing with men, but competing with the women and losing the battle is something which is really hitting them here. So nobody wants to lose because all through your life, civilizationally, you always believe that the women are inferior, men are superior, and men, that's why they used to acquire a lot of power. But I can tell you from my experience only because as long as I was a working husband, as long as I was earning good fat salary, the equation in my family was different. It's only me and my wife. I don't have kids. Since 2014, I'm unemployed. So the equation has changed. Now she's earning. So I had to live on her salary. So you could see the difference, the confidence in your partner and the assertion, not aggression. So I always believe that this whole concept of wife and husband is little more based on power equation. That wife has to submit to the husband and husband is the boss. What I feel in the last 12 years in my family, that she is the boss. And I have no problem submitting to her because she's feeding me day in and day out. But it is this concept which, in my opinion, is causing a lot of turmoil, lot of restlessness, not only in India, but at the global level. Look at what happened with the Trump. Trump was competing with the Kamala Harris. And traditionally, the women should be voting for the Kamala Harris and all the black men, all the Hispanic men who traditionally should vote to a Democrat candidate, they voted for the Trump. And one of the reasons is that many men across the globe are feeling that the space for their dominance is shrinking. The space is shrinking where they work, Because earlier, if there was 100 men working in the same space, now 30, 40 women are coming. So obviously, whom they are being replaced? The 30, 40 men are being replaced by women. So they have all the reasons to feel unhappy, restless, deprived, not only because they are losing jobs, but they're also feeling the dominance. Today, the relationship between husband and wife is also diametrically changing. And it's fundamentally changing. Because today, husband and wife both are earning. And if both are earning, both want, the wife wants an equal share in running of the house, running of their life. So what is happening? The men's space is shrinking. I think that is also happening in the boardroom, and men don't like it. They are feeling threatened, and that's why I'm saying this space is going to shrink more and more, because if you believe, the men believe, that just by doling out 1,000 rupees or 2,000 rupees, you can get their votes and you will rule. No, that's not going to happen. For some time this will happen, but at one point of time, the one will come and say, I want to be the prime minister, I want to be in the cabinet, I want my share in the parliament. That is going to happen.
Ashutosh, is it necessarily about a shrinking space, meaning one gender losing and the other gender gaining? I don't know, I can't quite,
I think the balance has to come there. Because if we say that the other half, then other half also have a share in the power equation.
No, just think of it as a Venn diagram where, like when you draw it, like one space, the green is the man, the red is the woman, and the space expands, and the other space doesn't shrink,
No, the space is not expanding. The space is the same.
I think the space is expanding. There are more women coming, more areas. That is why the intimidation also happens.
I'm saying that the universe is the same. Within that universe, the space for the men is shrinking. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. No, I would like to believe it is more about acceptance of the presence of women.
Very, very reluctant acceptance.
Sunita, if I can talk about something there, I think it's yes and no. It is very contextual. So in the context of India, for example, we are a growing economy. So if we were an economy that had gotten to a point, it would be a different story. But in India, actually, effectively, by putting a cap on the growth capacity of women who are well qualified and able to do things better, bigger, we are actually putting a cap on our capacity as households or as a nation to grow. So to that extent, we are artificially not only saying, okay, the woman earns less than, so I'll just give an example. So a husband and wife, I don't know about the South. I've been told that there is a much more progressive way in which you look at families. But in the North, most families are very clear that my daughter-in-law has to earn less than my son. That is the way the surge happens. The girl's family looks for a boy who earns more than the girl. The boy's family looks for a girl who earns less than the boy. Now that is a very strange way to create an economic unit where you are bringing two people together, one of whom always is expected to earn less than the other, which means that if the man so let's say Ashutosh for whatever reason went through his experiment and stopped working, and if he also had that problem that his wife always has to earn less than him, then that means she would also be unemployed, and as a family they would have a zero, right? That is actually a real situation. It sounds funny when I say that as an example, but it is a very real situation in many families where in my book, I travel through these coffee plantations in Chikmagaluru, and one of the things that I was told is that many second or third generation planters are really not interested in doing it anymore because plantation is hard work, laborers are not there, skills are deficient, rain patterns have changed, all of that. So they're really not that much interested in doing that work. But the women who are coming into these families, they are now coming with degrees in whatever, chemistry and biology and MPhils and CAs, so all kinds of, because women have a lot more education. So they're coming and then they want to do that or run that plantation. And if they can do it, there are many cases where they can do it, then the plantation gets revived and starts to do very well. But if let's say they were not allowed to do that because, how can you be doing more than the man, then that plantation would die. So I find many examples where actually letting this, the better of the two. So if my husband is a poet, and I always say this, that the luckiest thing that happened to me was to marry a poet. I mean, he's also a professor and a very accomplished man, and I have a lot of respect for his work. But this idea that if I had said that because he's the man, he will earn more, I would have been poor as mice. I mean, we would have been poor as mice. But that's just crazy. I find this idea that has somehow taken hold of patriarchy in this country in particular, at the household level, and that translates a lot into the corporate behavior, where I'm telling you, I have sat through discussions on wages and bonuses and incentives and increments, and there is always that thing playing in the minds of people that wo ladka bechara uski बीवी को भी support करना है उसको. Whereas for the girl, it's always like an optional thing. Ki, matlab, if you give her something, they did the same work, and you have no business thinking about this. But it has been very ingrained in our psyche, and we are getting out of it to some extent. But the more we discuss and the more we put it out on the table, the more we will benefit from it. Because a lot of these conversations need to happen within families. A lot of the attitude that travels to the boardrooms and to the workplaces comes from the families. You were earlier talking about how when a man swears, then a man swears in English, then nobody has a problem. But if a man swears in Hindi, then people have a problem. But similarly, I'm telling you, I used to work in an organization where the CEO was used to just swear. But the moment I walk into the room, he will become conscious because I'm the only woman, and he doesn't want to now sound like what he is, and so, but that spoils my relationship with him then, right? Because I'm the person who's putting who's making him aware or conscious, but he's much more comfortable with everybody else because those people don't have that filter. So all of these are things that you will start realizing when you dig into this world of gender. So it's not taking the space and making them scared or uncomfortable. It's also changing the space, changing the nature of that space, bringing things into the conversation that you're not comfortable. I have been told, for example, many times that, why do you talk so much about culture? So if you see my book, it doesn't just talk about commerce. I come from a finance background. I could write a book about growth and GDP and all that nice stuff. Culture is important to me. Culture is important to many women. But somehow, when we start talking about that, it changes the nature of the dialogue. And I think the discomfort comes not only from the fact that you are taking that space, the discomfort comes from the fact that you are changing the space, you are changing the nature of that conversation also.
No, just to conclude this particular topic, I think we are talking about different spaces and different Indias for that matter. And I'll just mention one thing which I'm not sure, people outside Kerala know much about. We have a set of women who led the migration process from the country. In the 60s, women from Kerala were migrated to Germany, basically first, and then they went on to other Western countries, and they were trained to be nurses. And we even have this term for the house husbands. They married and took to whichever country they were settling in. They are called... I don't know the correct word I should use. It's like the skirt husband. The husband who's wearing the skirt. Okay. So it's like okay, I won't say that in Malayalam. So see, the provider is the woman there, and the housekeeper is the man. And I've never heard about a nurse who takes night shifts and she's never there during evenings or in the mornings. It's always a husband who goes over there. We have many movies made about this particular sociological situation. So it's different, I think. We have so many Indias within this one India. And I think the women also, although we have a common pattern of life, we do have different perspectives on employment and spaces. And do you have anything to add?
What she was referring to about the two different cultures. When I was working with IBM 7, then Rajdeep, I used to report to Rajdeep Sardesai, and he was heading CNN IBM. So it's an anglicized, totally anglicized culture. And he could easily walk into this newsroom and say, "You bastard, this," and the women are there, and the girls and the boys were there, and they were giggling and happily. And even if he says, "You mother," you all kinds of things, that was acceptable. So when he came to my office, I took him in the corner and I said, "Please, if you are going to use these words here, these people sitting over here will feel very offended, and they will be very angry with you, because you have to understand that they are coming from a different feudal mindset. Most of them are coming from the rural background. So you have to be a little bit careful, and he understood that. See, the problem is that half of, not the half, in fact, two-thirds of India is still a very, very feudal society with the serious stereotyping of women. And I remember one of the pioneers, the Periyar, because Periyar was against the marriage institution per se. And he not only scolded God, religion, but he also scolded that there should not be marriages. Because marriages is stereotyping women. Ki chastity has to be with women, no men. The woman, if woman is having an affair, then she's supposed to be a woman of low virtue. But if the man is having an affair, it's kind of a trophy. So this difference, why pativrata, chastity, sati savitri, why it is attached to the women only? Why not for them? But that's what the society is all about today. But this whole thing is changing. Not only in India, but probably in India, my generation is probably feeling. But if you go to the West, you go to the USA or European countries, probably they felt almost 30, 40 years in 60s or in 40s, something like that. So the pushback is very strong. I think what we need, we don't need domination from the women, but we also don't need domination from the men. The relationship should be based on equality. And that is why I might repeat again, but I find it the word of husband and wife is basically based on domination and based of power structure. If we can find some other word like companion, like friends, why husband and wife, two person living under the same room, can live like friends, live like companions, who are not competing with each other, but complementing with each other, helping each other. Is that possible? I'm afraid that's not possible in India as of now, maybe 30, 40 years down the line.
If we take this forward, like you said, it's all about equality. And maybe we should think about democracy as the word to be used there. And when we talk about democracy, let's talk about political organizations and the legacy thing that comes in as tokenism and how it works there.
See, there are very few women who have really broken that glass shield in Indian politics. Mamata Banerjee is one. Mayawati is another. Jayalalitha is a third one. And rest, I think even if they are doing very well in politics, becoming member of parliament, other ministers, mostly coming from a political background. Basically, the dynasty is helping them. But Mamata is the one, Mayawati is the one, because both of them come from a very poor background. And rising from there and establishing their leadership and making themselves acceptable to men. Like today, I don't see that any man have guts to stand up and say something to the Mamata Banerjee. No, she has earned it. So even among the women, it is all about leadership. It's not that every woman can do well, provided the opportunity, access to the opportunity, even for the same with the women, same with the men also. But that leadership quality has to be there. If there is one single woman in a boardroom, but she has got the leadership, I can bet on it that she will lead the boardroom. But she is there as an ornament and doesn't have the leadership quality. Obviously, she will be like one of those props, something like that. So the leadership also very important. Look at the Mayawati. She comes from a Dalit background, and she can't probably write a word in English or something in English. But what a woman! She became the chief minister of the most populated state in this country, and asserting her leadership in a feudalistic society led by the upper caste, being coming from the untouchable touchable background, is something extraordinary. Sometimes we do not realize it. I think that is what is needed. We need irreverent women We need confident, aggressive women. We want arrogant women also.
Thank you, Sudarshan. Shinjini, I think it's time you talked about how this book came about.
Okay, I'm just simply going to read a little bit so that you know what I was doing. But now I can't find my glasses. I thought I had my glasses. Yeah. So everybody here knows Neena Gupta, the actor? Okay, so I'll read the part where I... So this is a section called Why Bother About Women? Neena Gupta is an actress in art and mainstream cinema and a television producer and director. She gained cult following in the 90s as a talented artist and a single mother. More recently, she made a stunning comeback in mainstream cinema and broke Instagram, saying it as it is. Neena told me once that a woman is like a cow tethered with a rope that keeps her within the perimeter of the family. The man, on the other hand, is like a bird who can freely go anywhere. It is not the kind of parable that I like to hear. Women younger than me like to hear it even less. You look at her and you think, what is she talking about? She has lived on her terms and is still doing it. She's got it all. Why would others not be able to do it? So, I want to prove her wrong. I want to prove that gender is not a barrier to a determined woman and that she can do everything that a man can do, including flying like a bird. I'm looking for the women who are indeed flying, and I find them. But I also find the truth of Neena's parable. Women's lives are circumscribed differently from those of men. For one thing, they rarely choose the space they get to live in. A small percentage of women like me or Neena leave their parental homes for education or work and set up their own homes. For the large majority, leaving home is a given, but where they will end up for the rest of their lives is dependent on who they marry. Even if she finds education, work, and money, decisions relating to her body, childbearing, career, and asset ownership are often not her own. She may still be able to make a meaningful life for herself and her family, but the tether is firmly in place. And then I talk about the impact of migration on women, most of the time, which is related to marriage. And then I talk about this geographical constraint is accompanied by another unfortunate constraint, that of physical safety. The fact that women are not safe for the most part in most places and at most times affects their lives in general and work life in particular. In addition, their life stages are very different from those experienced by their brothers and husbands. Even coming from the same backgrounds and families, women go through more disruption in work at early stages. Do all these constraints stop the women? Has greater access to education and skills allowed women to take advantage of opportunities in a growing economy? And what is this opportunity here and now after 3 decades of economic liberalization? Is the physical infrastructure generating advantage for Middle India and its residents, men and women? If so, what does it mean for migration and creation of many more urban centers with thriving urban culture across the country? I started my travel with these questions and an open mind. Making my way through 30 cities over 3 years, I made friends, drank nimbu pani, ate dosas, wore saris, took selfies, laughed, sweated, walked on pavements and promenades, and collected personal histories of the soaring women, the tethered women, and the women in between.
So, what do you actually remember more? Who do you remember most from this, from these 300 women?
I remember the soaring women because that's who I was going to look for and root for. Because I'm sorry, but we are a very big country and we cannot be crying all the time. And I definitely don't. But when I say soaring women, my definition of success is not somebody who became a billionaire and set up a unicorn only. There are women in this book who you will find who are successful in their own way because they have done so. There's this one girl I meet who's doing a pedicure, and she says every evening when she goes home and her husband is a car mechanic and he comes home, and she says, I make chai, and both of us sit and have chai, and then we do dinner, whatever. So I say, why can't he make his own tea? Because he's waiting for her to make tea when she comes home. And I expect to hear her grumble. But you know, she says something so beautiful. She says, Didi, ek cup chai hi to hai. Din mein wahi time milta hai inke saath baithne ka. So it's just about a cup of tea. That's the only time I get through the day to sit with him for a little bit. Really, it doesn't matter that who's making the tea if you can get that peace and that love that you are looking for. And the next thing that she says, which is most remarkable, Then I ask her, दारू पीता है? And she says, दारू पिएगा तो घर से निकाल दूंगी. So she knows what she is looking for and she can get it. So that kind of day-to-day negotiation that it takes to make it to where you want to get to is what the book is all about at a micro level. At a macro level, it is about a nation that needs to have better cities, more breathable spaces, more equal cultural spaces. You talked about, Ashutosh, the fact that there is dominance of the same type of people everywhere. You need to have spaces where everybody can sit together and have a, coffee or whatever.
We drink together.
Huh?
We drink together.
Yes, drink together. We need to have the matcha together.
I should not be feeling that I will be chucked out if I drink. So I made her also to drink. She made me drink. So we drink together.
I think we have time for a couple of questions if anybody has some. Please.
Hi, my name is Priyanka, and my question is both to Ashutosh sir and Sunita ma'am. Workspaces are predominantly designed for men. Like you fairly said, when you walked into a boardroom, the whole equation there changed. Because predominantly it was space for men where they have designed it to be comfortable for them. And the moment you walked in there, you became apologetic. That's what happens mostly with women when we come into a space which is masculine. We need the urge to become assertive, become more masculine. Is that fair? Shouldn't the workspaces require a change wherein there is a need to be rather than trying to transform into men in those spaces? For instance, when Ashutosh sir said that a pendulum is now on one side, it can never come into the center unless it also swings the other side. The balance cannot come automatically into the center. Weighing scale also works.
Look at the glee at her face. You want the pendulum to shift to the other side?
I'm sure it should be.
I mean, that's how the workspace will change when there's a little bit more of feminine energy rather than only the expectation of masculine energy.
See, it's a question of asking also. I mean, when people take it for granted that this is all we get, then I think it will just be that. Because I remember I was working with a corporate entity long back in my last gen. So it's like, I remember we were asked to sit near a place which was hotter. I mean, the window and the next building had an air conditioner which was spouting warm air into our space. And it is the women who stood up and said, we are not going to work. The men didn't say anything. I mean, there were a couple of union people who came and supported us, but that voice came from us first. And again, when you are asking for space, all they offer is maybe a feeding, if a baby comes in, if a creche, a feeding room, maybe a couple of more bathrooms, but I think it ends with that. We need much, much more. In fact, I came out of my job because I wanted to do more, but my biology was not helping me to remain there in the restricted space. I looked for more, so I came out. But we have to ask as well. Only the crying baby gets milk. I tell you, there is no democracy or equality as such until we make our point. This is my experience.
I also want to tell you something. The nature of work has changed significantly, and it will change so much with the current round of technology shift, that you are going to not even bother about this fact that, when first generation working women talk about we did not have a toilet when we started working. I was traveling with a very young woman from my startup, and she came out of a co-working space washroom, and she said, in Delhi, and she was from Chennai, and she said, oh my God, I was so shocked, there was no sanitary napkin disposal, the vending machine in this bathroom. So the fact that expectation has shifted from having a bathroom to a vending machine for sanitary napkins is itself the journey that we have traveled in 2 generations. So I think there is never going to be a perfect, ground ready for everything. You will have to build it as you go, and that's why it's important to just have people out there, because if you're not there, then nothing gets built for you. When you're there, then
Let me add this. The toilet spaces for women are so few, so very few, that see the board and corporate space is just not inside the office. There are women who are traveling for work, and we need this. And we have been asking the governments, the women organizations have been asking the governments to provide more toilet space for women, clean space, safe space, places which we can lock and keep without other people making it dirty. And I think I edited a report of a particular women organization, and this was something they focused upon, because this was the demand made by most women who were traveling for work, a toilet, a clean toilet.
That's why in the previous session they were talking about the gig economy and why there aren't women delivery workers or women drivers. It's because there are no toilets on the roads, and it's been a major barrier.
See, the office space, the only complaint I have when there are the women colleagues, that we men can't talk like men. It's very sobering effect. It's a very, very sobering effect. I can tell you when the woman walks into the newsroom and suddenly men realize, oh yes, we can't say something. I know. It's here. It's here.
Ashutosh, sir, despite all stereotyping, in Biocon, Kiran Majumdar Shah has emerged as a flying color in the global biotechnology scene. And at the other end of the spectrum, there is Chanda Kochar of ICICI Bank, who appropriated money from the bank. So as you said, women are asserting themselves. So what is your take on patriarchy being replaced by matriarchy?
I don't say patriarchy is going to be replaced by matriarchy. That's what I said. The equilibrium has to be reset. There are societies where the matriarchy is very powerful, and there are matriarchal societies. But mostly, if you look at it's across the world, it's a patriarchy.
Was there one more person? Yeah, one more question. I think that'll be the last.
Hi, I have something to ask. So, you said earlier about how when you're entering the boardrooms, some of the barriers to entry come from other people, all the existing members being somebody, and them being in the circle. Apart from that, when a woman enters the boardroom, do you want to expand on the expectation being there on a woman to be perfect, because you are finding yourself in a space where women are not there, and now you also carry the burden of not having to do it for your gender per se.
That is 100% true. Because but that's a question that's related to the simple volume. So if you've studied basic statistics, there's always the idea of the bell curve. Like you need a certain numbers to be able to actually begin to have some sort of a normal curve. So what happens, the question that this gentleman just asked, when you have very few people, then you even remember the name of Chanda Kochar. Now you will not remember the names of all the men who have done similar things, right? So that's it's a simple question of having fewer women. The moment the numbers become bigger, then you begin to identify that yes, even within women there will be this, that, whatever. It's just a professional job that you are doing. Like we are, I went for this poetry session in Patna, and there were these all men poets who were reading poems for some reason about mothers. And I was sitting there and saying, oh my God, these people must have had outstanding mothers, because I've been a mother and I've had a mother and no mother is perfect. But these men have perfect mothers. Their mothers are self-sacrificing, giving, doing everything, perfect, cooking. So it's like that. There is definitely that issue of, finding a better high. And I wish it was true. I mean, it's like the Avatar, right? If you see James Cameron's world, the women are the ones who are setting the virtue. But then they're also the villains, right? When you get far enough. So that's normal. That you can't help.
Okay, so shall we conclude then? Yes. So thank you so much for being here and listening to us. It was wonderful being with you.